Vanessa Leclerc stepped out of a sleek, black luxury car, the sharp taps of her designer high heels echoing against the ancient stone pavement of the square in front of Buckingham Palace. A cold wind swept through, causing the hem of her cashmere coat to flutter slightly. But she did not shiver. People like her did not let the weather dictate how they felt. Amidst the hundreds of tourists patiently waiting, Vanessa stood out like a queen among commoners. Not because she sought attention. Her pride naturally radiated through every gesture. One hand clutched a Birkin bag worth a small fortune, while the other held the latest model smartphone, scrolling through her tightly packed schedule. 15 more minutes. Snap the perfect shot and leave immediately. She muttered to herself, her gaze sweeping over the crowd as if searching for a private path, a special entrance meant only for people of her stature. When she noticed the long line of tourists neatly queued to secure the best spot for the changing of the guard, Vanessa had no intention of joining them. She had privileges. She did not wait in lines. Without hesitation, she pushed past an elderly couple, brushing them aside as if they were mere obstacles in her way. The woman let out a small gasp, stumbling slightly as she grabbed her husband's arm for support, but Vanessa did not spare them a glance. Nearby, a young mother holding her child instinctively stepped back when Vanessa's swinging handbag nearly struck the baby in her arms. The mother shot her a displeased look, but Vanessa merely arched an eyebrow, as if blaming them for standing in her path. A palace security officer, dressed in a polished uniform, approached her with a calm yet firm tone. "Madam, please join the queue with the other visitors." Vanessa halted, looking him up and down as though he were an unimportant servant. Then she let out a soft laugh, a laugh dripping with disdain. "Do you know who I am?" Her voice was as sharp as a blade. "I do not queue. I have a lunch reservation at the Ritz in an hour. I just need to take a picture and leave." The security officer did not budge. "Madam, all visitors must comply with security regulations. Please cooperate." Vanessa rolled her eyes, the reaction of someone unaccustomed to being denied. "This is ridiculous. This is a tourist attraction, not a military base. You are all taking this far too seriously." No one reacted. No one yielded. But Vanessa had already made up her mind. She would not let some nameless security officer stand in her way. With unwavering confidence, she strode straight into the restricted area, right into the middle of the Royal Guard's marching path. The crowd around her began murmuring, but Vanessa did not care. Vanessa stood right in the middle of the parade route, her feet firmly planted on the centuries-old cobblestones that had witnessed the march of history. She lifted her phone to the perfect angle, ready to capture the photo she believed would awe her followers. She did not care about the irritated glances around her. The nearby tourists whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads, others held their breath. They could not believe someone would dare to stand so brazenly in the way of the parade. But Vanessa? She only saw an opportunity, a shot no one else had. The perfect photo, a one-of-a-kind frame. She smugly thought to herself, adjusting the camera angle. A warning and disregard. Amid the tension, a deep but firm voice spoke right beside her. "Ma'am, you need to step back." Vanessa flinched slightly and turned. Standing next to her was an older man, dignified in appearance, clad in a neatly pressed dark suit adorned with gleaming military medals. He did not frown, nor did he scold her, but his gaze held a steeliness she was not accustomed to confronting. "You may not realize this," he said slowly, "but you were standing on the parade route of the Royal Guard." Vanessa sized him up quickly. A former soldier, perhaps someone who had served in the military. But that had nothing to do with her. She scoffed. "I have no intention of obstructing anyone. I just need one picture, then I will be on my way." The man did not appear angry, but something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of disappointment. "I have seen people like you before," he said evenly. "Those who believe the world revolves around them. But there are things that do not change just because someone finds them inconvenient." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. She did not like being lectured. "Oh, and what do you think these people are? Just a bunch of soldiers dressed up for tourists? They can walk around me. No one will be harmed." A ripple of reaction passed through the crowd. A few people shuddered at her lack of respect. But the veteran did not grow angry. He merely shook his head slightly, a faint, sorrowful smile appearing on his lips. I figured as much. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. And then, from the distance, the drums sounded, the unmistakable rhythm of discipline and tradition. The arrival of the guard. Vanessa turned her head, looking toward the far end of the square. They were coming, a formation of absolute precision, each soldier moving in perfect unison. Their scarlet uniforms gleamed in the daylight, the towering bearskin hats casting imposing shadows, their powerful steps echoing off the stone ground. Leading the procession was Sergeant Nathaniel Pierce, a tall and formidable figure, his stride as resolute as if carved into the very pavement beneath him. He had seen her, but his gaze did not waver. No hesitation, no doubt, because he knew his duty. He had marched under the scorching sun of Afghanistan, had maintained formation amid the deafening crack of gunfire. And this woman? She was nothing but an arrogant civilian, someone who believed fame and personal entitlement could bend the discipline of a military unit. She was not a threat. She was merely an obstacle, an obstruction that had to be removed. The palace officers swiftly approached, issuing one final warning. "Ma'am, move back immediately. The guard does not stop." Vanessa laughed. "You think I am afraid? They're not going to run into me. They're just ceremonial soldiers. Nothing more than a royal performance for tourists." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. They understood what was coming. They knew these soldiers never stopped. But Vanessa? She remained standing there, a statue of arrogance against the tide of history. The drums grew louder. The footsteps drew closer. Sergeant Pierce stared straight ahead. No deviation, no concessions. "They will not stop," the veteran murmured, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who had seen this before. Vanessa glanced up from her phone screen, just in time to see a crimson wall surging toward her. A split second before impact, a mother covered her child's eyes. A man gripped his wife's hand, bracing for the inevitable. A tourist raised his phone, capturing the final seconds of vanity. George Lancaster simply stood with arms crossed, as if watching a film with an ending that could not be changed. And Vanessa? She remained, still confident, still defiant, still believing the world would yield before her. But then, the impact came, with precision, with force, without hesitation, with the speed and discipline of a regiment that never stops. Vanessa never thought this could happen to her. She was used to concessions, used to a single raised eyebrow, a haughty glance being enough to make others step back, to make way. She was not the kind of person who was forced to follow rules. But this time, no one stopped. No one stepped aside, and the soldiers in their red uniforms advanced with an inevitability as certain as history itself. The first moment was a sharp, cold impact, a forceful and precise push, neither excessive nor lenient. Sergeant Nathaniel Pierce's shoulder slammed into Vanessa, like a blade cutting through the privileged shell she had wrapped around herself. Its power was not just physical. It carried the weight of an unyielding tradition. Vanessa had no time to react. She felt her high heels slip on the stone pavement, felt her body thrown to the side, completely out of control, felt her entire world flip in an instant. Her phone slipped from her fingers, soaring into the air before crashing to the ground with a sharp, sickening crack. Her designer sunglasses were flung aside, rolling several times before coming to a stop. But the worst was yet to come. She fell. Instinctively, her hands shot out to catch herself on the cold stone ground. And at that exact moment, Sergeant Pierce's heavy military boot came down. Not on purpose, not out of malice, but simply because that was his path, and she was an obstacle in the way. The sound echoed in the air. A scream tore through the sky. Vanessa did not care about the eyes watching her. She did not care about the crowd. She did not care about the humiliation. Pain exploded through her hand. Her heartbeat pounded violently in her chest. She screamed, the cry of someone who could not believe what had just happened. "You maniac! You stepped on my hand! You broke my hand!" She scrambled up, clutching her throbbing hand to her chest. "He attacked me. I will sue. I will destroy his career." But the most terrifying thing at that moment was not the pain. It was the absolute silence. No one reacted. No one rushed to help her. Not a single person hurried to lift her up, as they always had whenever she was in trouble. The soldiers? They continued their march. Not a single one looked back. Not a single one cared. Sergeant Nathaniel Pierce kept walking, his sharp blue eyes unwavering, as if she had never existed at all. The formation of the guards remained unchanged, their steps never faltering. She was nothing more than an obstacle that had been removed, and the world kept moving forward without her. The rage of someone used to being served. Vanessa's fury erupted. She shot to her feet, screaming at the retreating soldiers. "Stop! You have to take responsibility for this." But no one stopped. No one turned back. No one acknowledged her existence. Vanessa turned to the police, shrieking, "Arrest him! Immediately! I will not let this go unpunished." The security officers approached, but their expressions held none of the sympathy she had expected. "Ma'am, you have been warned multiple times." "I don't care. He assaulted me. This is an attack. This is violence. I will sue. I will take this to court." But the officers did not move with urgency. They did not see her as a victim. And then, as Vanessa looked around, a more horrifying realization sank in. No one supported her. No one sympathized. The tourists simply stood there, silently watching, many of them recording the entire scene on their phones. Their eyes held no pity, only disappointment, coldness, and something dangerously close to contempt. And then, a deep voice broke the silence. George Lancaster, a veteran, slowly stepped forward, his gaze full of understanding, but not a shred of sympathy. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke a single sentence. "You think you stand above everything, but there are things that will never bow to you." His words sliced through Vanessa's pride like a knife. She could not accept it. She could not believe that no one was on her side. But the truth? The world did not move according to her will. She was not special. She did not control everything. Vanessa still stood there, her hand trembling in pain. But what suffocated her was not the physical agony. It was the silence of those around her, the silence of an entire world that, for the first time, no longer revolved around her. She was no longer the center of attention, as she had always been. No more admiring glances, no more submissive nods, no more hurried apologies from frightened employees. For the first time, she felt small, and that feeling terrified her more than anything. The rage of someone unaccustomed to being denied. But Vanessa could not accept this. No, impossible. She was too used to being heard, to being served. So in her fury, she stormed toward the nearest officer, nearly hissing, "What are you standing there for? Arrest him!" P.C. Harris, a seasoned officer, showed no surprise at her outburst. He merely raised an eyebrow. "Arrest whom, ma'am?" Vanessa glared as if the question itself was an insult. "Who else? That soldier. He assaulted me. Did you not see? Did anyone not see?" She turned to the crowd, expecting agreement. But no one nodded. No one spoke in her defense. Instead, they stepped back, as if they wanted nothing to do with this absurd tantrum, as if they understood all too well that she was the one in the wrong. An undeniable truth. P.C. Harris flipped open his notebook, his voice calm. So calm it made Vanessa's blood boil. "Ma'am, we have gathered statements from multiple witnesses." And, she interrupted, her voice laced with smug anticipation. "And they all confirmed that you were repeatedly warned against obstructing the official parade route of the Royal Guard." A dagger to the pride. Those words struck Vanessa like a fatal blow. "What are you saying? I was attacked. He pushed me. He stepped on my hand." P.C. Harris glanced at her hand, where a small bruise was forming, then looked toward his colleague reviewing footage from bystanders. P.C. Mitchell, a female officer with piercing eyes, gave a firm nod. No deliberate assault. The actions of the guard were entirely in accordance with protocol. You deliberately placed yourself in the parade route despite multiple warnings. Vanessa turned pale. No way. Everything was unraveling, completely opposite to what she had expected. The police were supposed to take her side. They were supposed to apologize. That soldier was supposed to be punished. But reality? They did not care about her status. They would not bend to her outrage. And that shattered her more than any physical blow could. The veteran speaks. A voice, aged yet firm, broke through the silence. George Lancaster, the veteran she had ignored earlier. He stepped forward, his gaze devoid of anger or pity, only a cold understanding. Young lady, do you really believe that just because you have money and status, the world must bend to your will? Vanessa's mouth fell open, unable to comprehend how an ordinary old man dared to speak to her like that. I am not. But he raised a hand, cutting her off. Do you think the Royal Guard is a group of actors in a performance? Do you even know who Nathaniel Pierce, the man you just demanded to be arrested, is? Vanessa clenched her fists. She did not care. She just wanted revenge. But George Lancaster did not let her interrupt. He is not some tourist attraction. He is a real soldier. A man who has faced bullets, who has lost comrades on the battlefield. You think he would be afraid of your threats? You think someone who has survived war would cower before a rich woman screaming over a bruised hand? For the first time, Vanessa had no words. Those words struck at her pride, struck at her arrogance. And worst of all, they were true. The verdict is given. P.C. Harris slowly closed his notebook, his voice steady. Mrs. Vanessa LeClaire, for deliberately obstructing an official military operation, we have the right to charge you with obstructing a public officer. Vanessa stood frozen. You may voluntarily come to the station for questioning, or we can proceed with an arrest here and now. Arrest. Vanessa LeClaire. Arrested? No. Impossible. She felt her world collapse. Everything she had believed to always be within her control now crumbled beneath her feet. She could scream. She could continue to threaten. She could call her husband, her lawyer, the media. But, looking into the eyes of the officers, of the people around her, she knew none of it would change a thing. P.C. Harris was waiting for her answer. Around her, the crowd remained still, watching, waiting to see the fate of the woman who had once believed the world would bow before her. The bitter wind swept through the square, carrying the cold weight of reality. She had never felt this cold before. The collapse of illusory power. Vanessa wanted to scream. She wanted to shout that they had no right to do this to her. She wanted to pull out her phone, call her lawyer, call her husband, call anyone who could drag her out of this nightmare. But as she looked around, saw the eyes of the officers, the soldiers standing firm in their ranks, she knew she had no power here. For the first time in her life, she realized there were things that money, status, and the title of a wealthy lady could neither buy nor control. For the first time, she was truly alone. P.C. Harris remained there, his gaze sharp but devoid of hostility. There was only the unwavering resolve of a man doing his duty. Mrs. Vanessa LeClaire, I will ask one more time. Will you come voluntarily to the station, or must we arrest you on the spot? The silence stretched, so long that even the wind seemed to stop blowing. Everyone knew she had no real choice. Slowly, Vanessa's shoulders slumped. I will go. Her voice was so quiet that even she barely recognized it as her own. She had no other option. P.C. Harris nodded. Good. Please come with us. The walk of shame. As Vanessa stepped forward, she felt every gaze fixed upon her. Not with pity, but with the eyes of those who had just witnessed a lesson being taught. Every step on the cold stone ground grew heavier. She heard the murmurs in the crowd, heard a mother whisper to her child, "This is why you must respect the rules, my love. No one is above discipline." Heard a man chuckle and shake his head. People like her always think they are the center of the universe, until the universe teaches them otherwise. Each word cut deeper than the bruises on her wrists. But the worst part was knowing they were right. One last look. Before leaving the square, she turned back. She looked at the Royal Guard, still standing, unmoved. She looked at Sergeant Nathaniel Pierce, the man who had never wavered for her. He did not look at her. He did not need to, because to him, she was just an obstacle that had been removed. Not someone important, not someone worth remembering. And that was the most painful thing Vanessa had ever felt. Veteran George Lancaster stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. As Vanessa passed him, he did not smirk. He did not gloat. His voice carried only a chilling calm. "Do you see now?" She stopped, looked at him. There was no arrogance left, only confusion and something that looked almost like fear. George gave a slight nod, as if, finally, she understood. Some things do not bow to anyone. Then he turned and walked away. No more words were needed. The lesson had been taught. The royal guard continued their duty, as if nothing had happened. The crowd slowly dispersed, but the tale of the arrogant woman would not be forgotten anytime soon. Not because of the spectacle of her fall, not because she had cried out for justice when no one stood by her side, but because this was a clear lesson, a lesson on the difference between arrogance and discipline. Vanessa sat in the police car, her hands still throbbing with pain, but the physical ache was nothing compared to the crushing humiliation weighing down on her. The car window reflected her face, a distorted image of herself. No more pride, no more boundless confidence that she had always carried. Only emptiness remained. She searched her mind for something to hold on to, a reason to believe she was still right. But there was nothing, only the echo of her own voice, the truth she had deliberately ignored. From a distance, beyond the car door, the royal guards continued their duty. The soldiers stood there, motionless, unwavering. The crowd still flowed toward the palace, as if nothing had happened. And in reality, nothing had. The world did not stop just because she had fallen. She was merely a minor detail in the grand canvas of history. An arrogant person had collided with something immovable, and the immovable had won. Vanessa had once believed that money and status could bend everything. But today, she had learned a harsh truth. There are things that can never be bought. The discipline of those soldiers was not a performance. They did not stand there for her entertainment, nor for the amusement of tourists, nor for anyone else. They were men who had fought, who had lost, who had stood on the brink between life and death. Their honor was not something that could be threatened by a woman with a designer handbag and a reservation at the Ritz. And their discipline did not exist to serve anyone's selfish whims. It existed for something far greater. The difference between the truly strong and those who only think they are. Nathaniel Pierce, the soldier she had once dismissed as an actor, had not wavered before her. He did not need to respond to her anger. He did not need to defend himself. He simply carried out his duty, as generations before him had done. And that was the difference between arrogance and true strength. The arrogant believe their power comes from external things, money, fame, status. But the truly strong understand that real power comes from discipline, from resilience, from an honor that cannot be shaken. And that is why, at the end of the day, it is they who emerge victorious. Vanessa closed her eyes, trying to drown out the noise of the outside world. She wanted to believe this was just a minor incident, that tomorrow, when she returned home, when the media moved on to other stories, everything would go back to the way it was. That she would once again walk into lavish rooms where people bowed to her, where she was never denied anything. But deep down, she knew she had changed. She knew that no matter how hard she tried to deny it, this lesson had carved itself into her memory. The only question left was, would she learn from it, or would she ignore the truth, continuing to live in the illusion that the world revolved around her? Outside, a small child tugged at her mother's hand, pointing at the royal guard standing firm. "Mommy, aren't they tired? Why don't they move?" The mother knelt down, smiling, gently brushing a hand over the child's head. Because they are not here to follow anyone's wishes. They stand there for something greater than themselves. Her words rang out, soft yet heavy with meaning. And in that moment, Vanessa understood. There are things that do not exist to please her, nor to satisfy anyone else. There are things that cannot be swayed by wealth, privilege, or arrogance. There are things built on the foundations of discipline, honor, and tradition, things that will never bow to any individual. And if someone fails to understand that, then the world will teach them a lesson, one way or another.